We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Chesam and Aleph in Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesuvos Daf 48a. The Gemara here continues the Brisa. This is interpreting the pasuk which says She'era Kesusav Onasa Lo Yigra. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says She'era Kesusa. What does it mean when the pasuk says She'era Kesusa? It means Lafum She'era, according to her flesh. Here it means according to her age. Tain Kesusa. That's how you should give her the clothing. The clothing should be appropriate for her age. You shouldn't give the clothing of a young girl to an older woman. You shouldn't give the clothing of an older woman to a younger girl. And furthermore, he interprets the pasuk. What does it mean? Kesusav onasa. It means lafum onasa, according to the time of the year. Tain kesusa. That's how you should give her the clothing. You shouldn't give new clothing in the summer, meaning you shouldn't give heavy clothing in the summertime. You shouldn't give the worn out clothing during the rainy season. That's when you need heavier clothing during the colder time periods. And Rashi over here explains, Lafum she'era zikeina kasha lamasoy. When it comes to an older woman, so the heavier clothing are a burden on her. Ve'eni yechola lisbol begadim rechav. She can't have these larger clothing. V'yalda tzricha begadim rechavim lisnaus behem. But the younger girl, so she needs the heavier clothing. That's what makes her look more beautiful. Lafum onasa means to say lafi ha'es im chamo im tzina. If it's hot, if it's cold, that's how you should decide what kind of clothing. Chadashim is chamim him yoser min ashchakim. Chadashim, new clothing or heavier clothing, those are going to be warmer than the shchakim, and so that's why again the chadashim are appropriate for the amos hagashamim, and the shchakim are appropriate for the amos hachama. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tani Rav Yosef taught she'era zu kiruv basar. What does the word she'era mean? It means that when they have relations, they have to have closeness of the flesh. They shouldn't have relations when they're having their clothing on. Shelo yinog ba minag parsiim, that the husband shouldn't treat her like the way of the parsiim, like the way of the Persians. Shemeshamshin mitoseim beluvushayin. They would have relations in their beds, but they would have their clothing on. Messiah Leila Rav Huna, this supports what Rav Huna said. The Amar Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said, Ha'omer ifshi ela ani bebigdi v'hi bevigda. If a person says it's impossible for me to have relations with my wife unless I'm in my clothing and she's in her clothing, Yotzi v'nosin ksuba, he has to divorce her and he has to give her the ksuba payment. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer afilu anish Yisrael v'chulu. Rabbi Yehuda was saying, what is the minimum amount that a person needs to spend on his wife's funeral? And the Gemara says, Mechlal the Tanakama savar hani lo. It sounds like the Tanakama disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda and says that these things are not required. It was talking about the fact that the flutes are required and the mekonenes, the woman who's going to lament. And so the Gemara now says, Hechi dami, what exactly is the case? Idorch, if these things are the normal custom, this is what you normally have at a funeral. So my time with the Tanakama, Damar lo, what's the reason of the Tanakama that he says it's not required? If it's the normal thing, it should be required. V'idalav orcha, and if it's not normal to do it this way, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda that he requires it? And the Gemara answers, lo, no, tzricha, it's needed. It could go into urchei didei v'lav urchei dida. The case could be, let's say it's regular in his family, this is what they would normally do, but it's not the custom in her family. Tanakama Savar, the Tanakama holds, Ki amrinan ola imo ve'eno yoredes imo. When do we say that she rises with him and she doesn't go down with him? Meaning to say that when a wife enters a marriage, let's say there's a higher level of expectation on his side, so the expectation goes up for her. Meaning the standard has to be raised to the level of the husband on behalf of the wife. So that is a benefit of the wife, but hani mili, but that's only true, mechaim, that's only true when they're alive. That benefit that is for the wife, that the standard is raised on her behalf, that's only when they're alive. Avalachar misalo. However, the Tanakama says once she's already died, she doesn't get that, so since her family custom has a lower standard for the funeral, that's all he has to provide. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, but Rabbi Yehuda holds afilu lachar misa. No, this idea that the standard has to be raised. Let's say the husband's standard is higher than the wife's, then the wife gets treated at the higher standard. That applies even after she dies, and that's why, again, in this case, when the standard for the funeral is higher in his family than hers, she has to be treated with his standard. And again, the idea is ola imo, she gets raised to his standard, but she never gets lowered. If her family's standard was higher than his, so even though it's lower, she never gets lowered. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Marukva. Rav Chisda says that Marukva says, halacha, Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda in this regard, again, that even la'achar misa, the standard is raised on her behalf. And the Gemara continues, V'amar Rav Chisda, Amar Marukva, and Rav Chisda says that Marukva says, Misha nishtata, let's say somebody goes insane, Bezdin Yordan l'nechaza v'zonin mefarnesin es ishto, uvanav uvanosa v'davar acher. So the Bezdin's allowed to go down to his property, and they can give parnasa to his wife, his sons, his daughter, and they can give an additional thing, which will be explained in the Gemara. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, so Ravina said to Ravashi, Ma'ishna mehadatanya, what's the difference between this psak halacha and the following brisa? The brisa says, Mishahalach lemedina sayam, let's say a person goes traveling overseas, ve'ishto tovas mizonos, and his wife wants mizonos, she wants support. Bezin yordan l'nechasa v'zorin l'mefarnas in ishto, so the Bezin's allowed to descend to his property and they can sustain, and they can give parnasa to his wife. However, they can't give to his sons, they can't give to his daughters, and they can't give that additional thing. And so therefore, again, it seems to be a contradiction whether or not the banov u'benozov and davar acher, whether that gets support or not. Amar lei, so he said back to him, v'lo shani lach, but don't you make a distinction ben yotzei ladas liyotzei shelo ladas, between a case where a person leaves knowingly. In such a situation, a person is going on a trip overseas, so you have to assume that person is leaving his family. He's not necessarily going to want to support his sons and his daughters, etc. But yotzei shelo ladas, a person goes insane, there we can assume the person didn't do that willingly. We can assume that he would want us to support his sons and his daughters, etc. And the Gemara says, "My davar acher." What is this davar acher over here that we're referring to? Rav Chisda Amar, Rav Chisda says, "Zet tachshit." This refers to the ornaments for his wife, the adornments, the jewelry for his wife. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef says tzedakah. This is a reference to tzedakah, whether we can go down to his property, take from his property in order to give charity. And the Gemara says, "Man damar tachshit kol shekein tzedakah." The one who says that we're not allowed to take his property for tachshit, for the jewelry, certainly we can't go to his property to get tzedakah. Man damar tzedakah, but the person who says that you're not allowed to get tzedakah, avol tachshit yavin Allah, but you would be allowed to give her tachshit. You can give her the jewelry, the lo nichalei de tenavel, because she doesn't want that his wife should tenavel, that she should look disgusting, that she should not look pleasing. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Chia bar Avin, Amar Rav Huna. Rav Chia bar Avin says that Rav Huna says, Mishahalach lemedinas hayam umeisa ishto. Let's say a person travels overseas and his wife dies. Bezin yordan l'nechasa v'kover nosa. Bezin can use his property, they can use his money in order to give her a proper burial, lefi kavodo, according to his honor, according to the respect that his family would have at a funeral. The Gemara says, lefi kavodo v'lo lefi kavoda. Does it mean to say according to his honor and not according to her honor? Meaning, what if the way that she and her family it was done, what if it was even more honorable in that situation? And the Gemara says, Eima aflafi chavodo. No, what it means to say is even according to his honor, meaning if in his family it's a higher standard, that has to be applied. Hakamashvalan, this comes to teach us, Ola imo, that she rises with him, ve'eno yoredas imo, but she doesn't descend with him, so you always give her the higher standard. Ve'afilu lachar misa, and this shows that this is true even after she dies, because we're applying this standard to her funeral. And the Gemara continues, Amar of Masna says, Ha'omer, let's say a person says, in Mesa, when she dies, when his wife dies, lo sik baruah min chasav, she should not be buried from his property, shomin lo, so then we listen to him. Rashi over here says, Ha'omer b'shas misaso, let's say a person says at the time of his death, in Mesa ishto shomin lo, so then we listen to him, we don't use his property for her burial. Dekevan duhu meis, the reason is as follows, Dekevan duhu meis b'chaya, since he died while she was alive, v'hi gova ksuvas, and she has collected her ksuba, eino chayev l'kover, so the husband is no longer obligated to bury her. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Yorsha, it's the people who inherit her. Yorshe ksubasa, those who inherit her ksuba, chayavin b'kvurasa, those are the ones that are chayev to bury her, and that's why we listen to him. But the Gemara says, Ma'ishna kiyamar, but what's the difference that he has to say that? Even if he doesn't say that, it should be enough. Because kiyamar denafli nechse kamei yasmi, because his property has fallen in front of the orphans, and they're not obligated. Kilo amar nami nechse kamei yasmi rama. But the same is true if he didn't say anything. His property went to those who inherited him, to the orphans, and therefore, again, they're not chayiv to take care of this. Rashi over here says, nechse kamei yasmi rama, pshita dein kvura salem. It's obvious that her burial is not upon them. So why is it that it's only if he says this that we listen to him? It should be true all the time. And so the Gemara says, Ella, rather, what it should be, Rav Masna's statement should be as follows, Ha'omer imit meis hu lo sikvru min chasav. Let's say a person says when he's dying, he says don't use his property to bury him. Ein shomin lo. There we do not listen to him. Lav kol emenu sheyashir es bono v'yapel atzmo al hatzibor. He's not allowed to enrich his children and have it now that the community needs to take care of his funeral. That is not allowed. Rather, it is his nechasim, it's his property that has to be used to take care of his funeral. Rashi over here says, I'll take brumi nechasav el min tzedakah. He says, I'd rather be buried from charity. That he's not allowed to do. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Li'olam hi b'reshus ha'av, she's always in the reshus of her father, ad shetikones, until she enters. Rashi over here says, Li'olam hi b'reshus ha'av, im bas Yisrael me'orasa l'kohen. We're talking about as follows. Let's say she is a bas Yisrael, she's the daughter of Yisrael, and she's betrothed to a Kohen. He eina ocheles betruma v'zakoi ba kechol zuchus abavito. She's not allowed to eat truma yet. She remains in the reshus of the av until, as we'll see in a moment, and again, he has all the zechusim in her, like any father with his daughter. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Memches Amud Beis.